Welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast from madsingers.com, where entrepreneurs and business managers learn and share. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a review.
Welcome to the next episode of the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Today I have with me Ludovic. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Ludovic, not everyone knows who you are. Would you mind sharing a little bit about all your amazing expertise and background and so on with the listeners so they get a little bit of a view into who you are?
Absolutely. So I'll start from the beginning. I started my career in sales purely by mistake, but it fit perfectly. I then became, since I'm a horrible employee, an advisor to help sales teams develop and become better. And that I did for many years. I specialized in the financial industry, but I worked with many different industries. I still have some of my clients, of course, from the sales and negotiations advisory business. And in addition, I founded the Good Life Manifesto. This was just a little bit over a year ago, where the idea is to help people find what will make them happy in life and help them achieve that.
Awesome. What makes you happy then?
What makes me happy is traveling, meeting new people, new cultures, new foods. New foods, definitely. I'm a big food person. And just being able to live life the way I want to. Every day, waking up and asking myself, where do I want to be today?
And right now, where's the answer to that question?
Right now, I'm actually in a little suburb of Paris called the Rueil-Malmaison. It's a nice little suburb. It's actually of the various suburbs around Paris, one of my favorites. And that's it. It's a calm little place, unlike the busy, noisy middle of Paris.
Awesome. Well, that sounds good. And so sort of a little bit more around your background and so on, right? So you said you've been working mostly in sales and so on. Obviously, yes. I have a lot of entrepreneurial listeners that occasionally struggles with sales, I would say. Any particular valuable lessons or any particular valuable sort of hints and tips for them?
Absolutely. So obviously, each case is different, so I can't say that one thing works for everyone. But sure. The main thing that I found out already very early is, even if you're not very good, sales is a numbers game. So if you contact enough people, if you reach out to enough people, at some point you will close a sale and you'll become a little bit better because you'll be able to learn what works and what doesn't. Just do that again and again and again. The hardest part with it, let's be honest, is the rejection, when somebody says no. So it's just putting that aside and continuing. That's really the best thing I can say to anyone that's struggling a little bit. The first yes is the hardest one to get. Once you get that first one, there is usually a little switch in the person's brain. I'm talking about the salesperson or the executive, whoever is doing the sale in this case. There's a little switch that happens and it becomes a little bit easier.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. How long have you been running your own business now?
So at this point, I'm 38 and I started my own business when I was 24, so 14 years.
14 years, very good.
Yes.
What's been the biggest management challenge that you have ever faced in your business?
The biggest management challenge was being able to put a good limit between being friendly with people and being friends with them. There's a big difference between both, and that for me was the hardest part.
And any horrible situations you've managed to get yourself in? In that regard?
Yeah. So this one is very politically incorrect, maybe, but I was invited by one of the sales teams that I was training to go out in the evening. And, I always stay very professional in that sense. Most of the team were men, so no issues there. But there were two women, and they joined that evening also. And one of them, it turns out, because, I was friendly with people, was hitting on me. And personally, I'm not really used to that, okay? I don't have, the Brad Pitt looks. I mean, a woman hitting on me at any point is like, oh, really? This is happening? But even more so when this is an employee that I'm training. So I gave my apologies, walked out of there, and the next day, so they invited me again. I was like, nope, this is not happening again, guys. It was great. Thank you for the invite, but you go out on your own.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah. That was early in my career, by the way. That's a mistake I don't do anymore.
Yeah. No, I would say, I mean, it's very typical, this thing with, like, when you're working with friends or colleagues and the likes, and a lot of it often happen because people get promoted from within, right? So they're the first part of a peer group, and they get promoted, and suddenly they have to be everyone else's boss. And some people find it very difficult, and some people find it not so difficult.
Well, it's actually one of the reasons. One of my clients one day was debating with me whether he should promote someone from within or hire someone from outside. And it's one of the points that we had to bring up, that there will be that issue. And will that person be able to deal with it? Yes or no?
Yeah, I would say if that's the biggest challenge, I would say it's definitely a situation to go for. But yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense, right? Because I think fundamentally, and just like all management, this is one of the lessons you need to learn, right? And I have a lot of people generally asking me, like, can I be friends with my coworkers? And what I always tell them is really more of a guidance, is really, you need to figure that out by yourself. Like, if you're consistently able to be honest with yourself and treat the person as anyone else in the team, because you have a friendly relationship with them, if that's the case, then you are okay to do it. But if you know with yourself that you would struggle to give a friend of yours like a performance what do you call, like a performance review? Or, like give them some corrective action, or even having to let them go. If you know you struggle with that, then you probably shouldn't go down the route of becoming too friendly with your staff, right?
Exactly.
But I've definitely, like, I've met in my career myself a lot of people who had a lot of opinions around it on both sides, honestly. And like, naturally, I guess, unfortunately, somehow, I'm unfortunately very unemotional myself, so I've never had a problem with that particular aspect. But I've definitely had people saying, "Oh, you can't be friendly with this person because that you're gonna favoritize them," and I'm like, nope, I do exactly the opposite. The better I know people, the more I expect from them. And anyone that knows me can definitely attest to the fact that it's not fun being my friend and working for me. So.
Well, that reminds me, by the way, when I was learning to drive, one of my mom's neighbors, he was not an instructor, but a tester, for the driving test. And I was saying, oh yeah, it'd be great if I fell on him on my testing day. Mom looked at me and said, absolutely not, because he knows you, he'll be even tougher with you. Don't even go there, And it's true. I will say I had a great role model in that sense, is that my first client was actually a friend. That was the reason that he asked me, he said, you're a horrible employee, might as well, be a freelancer. Here's your first job. And he was very good at being friendly with everyone. He really is friendly with everyone. He's one of those people that you just want to become friends with. But he always had that limit. Even when he took out the entire team for an evening out, he would always be better dressed. He would pay for everyone. And he would come in every so often, but he would stay outside the group most of the evening. So he made that physical difference, which made a difference also in people's mind.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Sense.
Yeah.
Excellent. Any other big challenges or any big struggles you've had throughout your career so far, management-wise?
I'm not sure most people will be able to relate with, but some will in different ways. So, the way that we look, the way that we present ourselves makes a big difference in the way people perceive us.
Yep.
And I was not blessed with height. I was blessed with many things. Height is not one of them. If you put me in a group, I will usually be one of the shortest ones. As far as management, that can be at times very difficult, because some people's first impression may be very easily, it's part of our genes, our instincts. We may have less respect for someone who is shorter than for someone who is taller. There are studies about it, so I'm not just making this up.
Yep.
For me, that biggest challenge was presenting myself in a way that people didn't notice that. I mean, they would notice, you can't really miss it, but wouldn't pay attention to it. Meaning everything else had to be so perfect in the way I presented myself that they would overlook this part. Now, most people don't have this same issue as me, but everybody has something, in which either they're not as confident in, or people may see them differently. And my suggestion is make everything else as perfect as possible so that they will overlook whatever small other issue you have.
Yeah, I'll definitely follow on not blessed with height. That's definitely also one of the things that I have not been given gracious advantage with, if we say that way.
Okay, yes.
But yeah, I would say honestly, I've never really had much challenge with it in life, and then I would say actually business travel is probably one of the areas where you really start enjoying the fact that you aren't hurting your legs and so
Absolutely.
on. But, yeah.
Listen, I was on a transatlantic flight from the U.S. To Amsterdam. And, in first class, you can lay back the entire seat. You can really recline completely, right?
Yep.
Next to me, there was a Dutch guy, and Dutch people are very, very tall, usually. He wasn't able to, lay back fully. So the 10-hour flight for him was not as comfortable as for me, where I just literally lay back straight and fell asleep.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm born in Denmark, which I think they're the second highest in average in the world after the Dutch. And I would say definitely I'm only one. I'm not sure what that's American, but I'm 160, 167, 168 or something like that. So I was like in my class when I was a kid. There was only one person out of a 30-person class. There was one person shorter than me, and she was like half a centimeter shorter or something like that. So for Danish standards, I was ridiculously small. But I'd say it's definitely not something I've ever noticed in management. But you're 100% right. I mean, there's a lot of studies around sort of the particularly height and also how good looking you are and things like that, where it's just attributed, and human beings just tend to look up to people who are, either more masculine or feminine and so on. So
absolutely,
that makes total sense.
So one of the things that I was lucky with is that my mother always taught me to stand up straight. So between that and the fact that the way I present myself in every other way is really, to the best of my ability, people really don't notice it. I once had, a friend's friend asked me what my height was. I answered, FYI, I'm shorter than you. And he was like, oh, really? I never would have guessed. Just because of the way that I hold myself and present myself.
Yeah. No, it makes total sense. And I would say I unfortunately haven't been blessed with the straight back, but I'm working on that one. But I'd say, so one of the things that have worked really well for me, and I'm not sure if that's just management-wise or life thing, but I've always loved to underplay myself. Like even as a management coach, right? I don't say get dressed sloppy, but I really enjoy being definitely not the best dressed guy in the room, because I really love to surprise people, if you will, or I like people to not have high expectation, because it makes them significantly easier to blow people away if they're not expecting much. So that's something that have always worked really well for me. Just at the other end of that spectrum.
Yeah, that's an interesting method. I don't think I'm ever the best dressed in room. I just dress cleanly all the time, like very put together.
Sure.
But that's an interesting concept. I'd never thought about it in the way that you're presenting it.
I definitely, as a coach, I really, really enjoy it. Like if I come into a business and I might wear jeans and a t-shirt or something. I mean, corporate, I used to wear a suit all the time, right? But as a coach, like if I wear jeans and a t-shirt and I walk into a business where most other people are at least wearing a shirt or so on, I don't know, like it's probably a personal thing more than anything, because I kind of feel a little bit of a confidence boost from it.
Okay.
Again, because probably like yourself, like I know my stuff inside out, right? Like the same in
Right.
business, like when I was in management and so on. Like, yeah, just somehow I've definitely, I've always felt very comfortable when people sort of underestimated me, if you will. So, well, that's good. We're all different. We're all different.
Yes, we are. That's why the thing is, we all need to know our strengths and our weaknesses.
Definitely. What's your biggest weakness?
I like to laugh a lot. It's hard for me to be very serious. Even things, which are serious, I often deal with them with laughter. And it took me a long time to realize that that can be very off-putting for some people. It can also mean that, it takes me longer to really put serious thought into an issue that may come up, just because my first reaction will be to laugh it off.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So that's my biggest personal weakness.
Interesting. Yeah, it's actually, I know a lot of interviewers have gone away from this question, but it's
Really?
still, for me, one of the most interesting questions to ask. And I do a lot of sort of behavioral models, such as DISC and Myers-Briggs and stuff, particularly DISC. And I love being able to analyze people and see, one, how well they actually know themselves, and two, how honest they're willing to be with a stranger at an interview situation. Because they are probably those two things that, for me, make the biggest difference with successful hires. Because I've always found that, people who are willing to be honest and show vulnerability is generally the people, at least in the businesses that I own, is generally the people that tend to work out the best. Now, if that's just in my business necessarily, I'm not sure of, but that's definitely something that I've found from a recruitment standpoint that works really, really well for me.
So I have a theory about that, if I may.
Indeed.
The thing is, in communication, I'm going to use a Sun Tzu quote, where if you know yourself, you can win half. If you know the other side, you can win half the battles. But if you know both sides, you can win all the battles, right?
Yep.
So communication is not a battle, obviously. It's the opposite, where you try to reconciliate with another person. But essentially, the idea is to achieve a goal. Now, if you know the other side, you can win some of the battles. If you know yourself, you can win some of the battles. So if you know both, you can win most of the battles. And that's the reason for me that knowing myself is just as important as knowing the other side that I'm communicating with, because I can achieve better goals. I can get there much more easily.
That makes that makes a lot of sense, and I think at least for me, like I've always found honesty to be one of the most important aspect of people definitely working in my kind of culture. But that makes a lot of sense, and generally my focus on communication always is very strong, because I always fundamentally believe that it's the one thing that all people should always improve, right? Because we communicate all the time, like whether it's business or private or whatever, and therefore it's one of those never-ending development areas for all human beings, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, interesting. So what's the biggest value that you usually add to companies that you come in and work with? Like what's sort of the biggest thing that people generally say to you, wow, you helped me do this thing?
Depends if I'm working with a sales team or an executive, okay?
Yeah.
If I'm working with the sales team, usually the team, oftentimes, incredibly enough, starts off, by the time I'm done with them, smaller than when we first started working, because I fire easily. Okay, anybody who I think is not going to help us improve is out. And so usually, even though they're smaller in numbers, they're actually able to achieve more sales overall. That's when I work with a sales team. When I work with an executive, the funniest thing is that despite because I can push. I can really, really push. I need to hold myself back from pushing too much oftentimes. But despite that, by the time we're done working together, they feel a lot less stressed, a lot more relaxed in their work environment, and able to achieve more because of that. Because oftentimes, when we're stressed, when we have too much that's taking up in our minds in the loop again and again, we're not very efficient, not very effective in our working methods. And by the time we're done working together, they're usually able to achieve just as much, if not more, but in a much more relaxed way.
Yep. That makes 100% sense.
I had a client who, before we worked together, he used to have regular anxiety attacks in the office.
That sounds fun.
It's horrible. We once had a call. I didn't know this in the beginning. And we once had a 3-way call. And he called me up afterwards. He said, just that you know, after that call, I had to have a drink and a nap. I was like, why? He said, I was starting to be really, really anxious and I was going to have an anxiety attack. I mean, you know that something is off, when that's your issue.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. We worked together for about a year, and by the time that we stopped working, he was a completely different person.
Yeah. Excellent. And again, that's very similar. People always ask me, like, when should you start hiring and so on, right? And, when's the best time to hire your first person? And I always say when you have financial calm to do so. So,
Yes.
Sometimes people go out and hire someone else, but it means that, they won't eat for 2 months. And that's not a great, as an entrepreneur, that's not a great philosophy, because the thing is, every time you struggle with finances, you're not calm as an individual, and you spend so much time and energy thinking about finances that you actually distract yourself so much, right? And
Absolutely.
really, that big distraction is so detrimental for, potentially so detrimental for business, right? So that's
for business and for the person, even in their personal life.
Yep, correct.
I mean, at the end of the day, after you're done with your business, you still need to go home and live your life. And if you're doing something which is so detrimental to you, which badly affects your business, badly affects your mental and probably physical health too, then you should not be doing it.
So when you say go home, do you mean like actually have a life outside the business?
I know, it's surprising, right?
Right. Interesting. That's a new concept.
I know most people are really, they've never heard of it before.
No, a lot of people, they listen to this dude called Gary Vee, and he says they have to hustle every hour of every day. So, yeah.
Okay, so I will say, Gary Vee has a lot of great insight. He does. And for a long time, I really had a hard time with him because of that, message that he has of you need to be hustling all the time. I will say that he did once catch himself and say, look, this lifestyle is not for everyone, so at least that was good. But this idea of all the time being on the go, there are very few people who really enjoy their lives that way. Most people do not. He does, apparently, and that's great for him. But he is definitely not a role model for most people.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And actually, I think the fundamental and where most people go wrong is, again, like if you're working 24 hours a day type thing, the problem for most people is they are maybe working way too much, but they're always doing the wrong things, right? Where I think that there's definitely some people. I mean, if you look at people like Musk, for example, I'm not saying he couldn't be better if he worked less, but I'm saying that there's definitely people who are very, very, very focused on what they do, and who actually have built up a great team around them and can actually achieve relatively amazing things.
Yes.
And because they are so focused and they're really good at what they do. The thing is, most entrepreneurs is not that, right? So most entrepreneurs haven't figured out what they're doing. And when they're working ridiculously many hours, what they do is they're literally cutting their own legs off, because they're not at a point where they actually are doing the right thing. So, and every time they're doing the wrong things and they keep doing it and they keep pushing and they keep killing themselves, basically what happens fundamentally is that they actually put the business in a much more difficult situation, because they really end up in a situation where, they aren't taking care of themselves, and they actually run the business to the ground because they're working so many hours.
Absolutely. And I'll add that, even with one of my biggest life lessons is I'm 38 today. My father died when he was 41. Okay.
Yeah.
And I keep that in mind all the time, because don't get me wrong, I'm very hungry, for my businesses to work well, and I love it. But ultimately, you never know when it could end. I have a childhood friend who died 2.5 years ago. I mean, he was 35. That's young. That's very young.
Totally.
And you can never know when it could be something really dumb, right? Or it could be something like, there are many different reasons. Now, if you're working full time, because you have a big goal, a big dream, that's awesome. But don't forget that you also need to enjoy the path. And the path, the path also includes the rest of life, not just work.
Yeah. And reality for all of us is that, life is on a clock.
Exactly. And ultimately, here's the thing, the work is incredibly important, but you enjoy it more when you also have a contrast, as with everything, just like you can't know what joy is without pain, right? You can't really enjoy the work 100% if you don't have the contrast of life, which is not work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as I've always said, like, the way Musk lived his life as an example, where, he's like, oh yeah, I should spend 35 minutes with my kids every day. It's like, if I would ever have to schedule something as important as my kids into my life that way, I would feel absolutely horrible about myself.
Absolutely. Now, having said that, we're lucky as humans in general to have people like Musk alive, because we do need those people that are also gung-ho and very focused on that one goal.
Yeah.
But most of us don't need that. Most of us actually fare a lot better when we have a balance. And when it comes to communication, also, it's a lot more fun, because remember, as we said earlier, communication is the key to everything. People communicate with you a lot more easily, just because it's a lot more enjoyable when they see that there's more in your mind than just work.
I'll totally agree to that as well.
Yeah, I once, just to give an example, I once gave a speech at a university to a group about entrepreneurship. It was communication in business. And I don't remember, but the guy who was supposed to, give me the go-ahead, we weren't, connecting really. Like he was saying, yeah, it would be good, but I'm not entirely sure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all of a sudden I see on his wall a picture of the rock climbing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I asked him about it. He says, oh, I love rock climbing. And at the time I was just learning how to rock climb, because I'd been bouldering for a few years already.
Yeah.
And at that point, so we started talking about that. And then he's like, you know what? I'll figure it out. Let's find a date. I'll figure out how to make this work.
Yeah.
So life
Makes
is
sense.
important in communication also.
Definitely. What from a sales perspective then, what's sort of from an entrepreneurial standpoint, right? What's generally the best way getting started with setting up a good sales process? Because I think that there's sort of two steps of the entrepreneurial journey when it comes to sales, right? One is sort of making the first couple of sales, but the probably at least as important one is actually getting to the point where you have an actual solid sales process where you're going through sales consistently and you keep improving and so on. Any sort of framework or something you want to share around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So since each sales process is a little bit different, also because of the product or service that you're selling, but also because of the person who's selling.
Yep.
Then what I recommend always is to document everything. Meaning, when was the call made? When did the person reach out again or not? When you reached out again, document everything. And at some point you'll find a pattern. When you document everything, you can also test. You can make little changes and see little tweaks here and there and see what works, what doesn't, what improves things, and what makes them worse also sometimes. Once you find a pattern, you can start, then you have a guideline. Okay. And then when you hire the first salesperson, for example, or the second or the third, each one may tweak a little bit based on their personality, but that basic guideline will be able to be used with every new hire.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So document everything.
Documentation. People love SOPs and data and so on.
And it works. It works. If you document everything, you know what to tweak, what not to tweak.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, one of my biggest pet peeves is that so many entrepreneurs, they establish a good marketing channel, and then they're like, oh, now I want to try and do something else. So they've already found something that actually works, but they're still, always looking for better solutions. So they basically stop something that is working to try something that might or might not work. And they actually forget about the thing that was working. And I'm always very, very conscious, like in any business I ever in touch with, like if you find something that works, even if you want to do something else, you absolutely figure out a way for someone else to keep doing. Like even if it's not you doing it, if you figured out something to work, you want to make sure that someone else in the business keep doing that thing so that you don't end up losing that. Because the problem is if the new thing you're trying ain't working, then you end up running around in circles and testing like 50 billion new things and the latest social media stuff and so on, right? But that's definitely horrible.
No, absolutely. And there is also something else. If you're going to change something, and this is something I'm a big believer in, don't overhaul the entire process entirely. Change one thing at a time and see how it affects things. Because if you change more than one thing at a time, you won't know what it is that affected the result.
Right. Yeah, so what I was mostly elaborating to was basically, people might figure out, oh, well, if I send 5 LinkedIn messages every day, I get some sales, right? And they might be, Facebook might be much better. So I'll go to Facebook. So they literally drop the whole fundamental. Yeah. And they go somewhere totally different, right? But I totally agree with you with small changes. Like I'm also a super data nerd, right? So I love testing everything to the nth degree and having data and making good decision based on that, right? But I think that makes sense.
No, but I see what you mean also about people leaving everything behind and trying something new just because because they read an article somewhere that this is the way to do it.
Yeah. Makes sense. Ludovic, that was an awesome talk.
Thank you.
If people want to get in touch with you and so on, what's the best place to get hold of you and so on?
So if you're looking for social media, then just at my full name. That was a decision early on. It's easy to find me, Ludovic Vuillier. It's a fairly uncommon name, so I'm the only one that you'll find with that. If you're looking for a website, the business website is Bear's Crest, which I'll send you the link so you can use it. It's BAERSCREST.com. And the new projects, for the Good Life, thegoodlifemanifesto.com. That's where you'll find me.
Excellent.
Oh, let me just add, if anybody has a love of travel and birds, you can check me out on my personal website too. But I have a feeling that will be fairly uncommon.
I definitely know a lot of my audience love traveling, but birds specifically, I don't know anyone in that niche, I would say.
Yeah, I know. I'm one of the few.
That's always good. It's always good to be unique.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time, Ludovic. That was awesome to talk with you. And thank you very much for sharing all your knowledge and expertise.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Please leave a review. It means the world to us. You can also learn more about management at madsingers.com.